salt burns your lips as you bite the mouthpiece and descend into the Aegean gloom. The world above fades into a trembling mosaic of silver light, and the sea presses closer with every meter. The hiss of air, the muffled thud of your heartbeat, the creak of the dive hose all blur into a rhythm that feels ancient, as if the ocean itself were breathing with you. The deeper you go, the colder the water becomes, curling around your neck like the hand of something older than memory. You are a sponge diver from Simi, hired for a season's work but driven by something hungrier than pay. The Mediterranean storm that forced your boat to shelter near Antikythera has left the water heavy with silt. Visibility is poor, but in these depths, treasure often sleeps beneath the ruin of storms. You scan the seafloor through the faint glow of your diving helmet, its brass frame rattling against your temples. Broken amphorae, scattered coins, a marble arm half buried in sand. The seabed is a graveyard of lost empires, silent and waiting. You steady your breath and drift lower. The current brushes your shoulder, as if guiding you towards something. Then, out of the murk, a shape catches your eye, an edge too sharp to be coral. You brush away the silt, bronze, corroded green, thick with centuries of salt and silence. A wheel? No, a disc. A cluster of interlocking circles fused together like petrified vines. You tug, and the object resists, half swallowed by stone and shell. The surface crackles through your earpiece, your captain shouting for you to ascend, but the sight below freezes you. Around the bronze shape, statues lie shattered horses, faces of gods, marble torsos cleaved in half. The wreck sprawls across the slope of the reef, the remains of a ship that must have carried riches once fit for an emperor. You look back at the object in your hands. It feels wrong, too intricate, too deliberate. This is not a relic of art. It feels like intent, like thought, trapped in metal. You tie a line around it and send the signal to hoist. The weight pulls from your grasp and vanishes upward into the dark. You follow, lungs aching, as light sharpens above you. The waves roar when you break through, sunlight flashing across the deck where your crewmates crowd around the find. The object lands with a heavy, dull clang against the boards. No one knows it yet, but what you've pulled from the sea is not treasure. It is time itself, bound in bronze, waiting to be understood. The sea closes behind you, holding the rest of its secrets for another day. The bronze fragments arrived in Athens packed in wooden crates, still dripping with salt water. Curators at the National Archaeological Museum pried them open, expecting coins, statues, marble heads, treasures the sea had swallowed. What spilled out instead was confusion. Corroded lumps of metal, encrusted with barnacles and rust, their surfaces twisted into strange, toothed shapes. The year was the opening of the 20th century, and no one imagined that a shipwreck could contain something mechanical. The crates had been hauled from a vessel that sank somewhere between Crete and the Peloponnese, a Roman ship heavy with loot from the eastern Mediterranean. The divers who found it told tales of marble horses and bronze heroes lying face down in sand, their eyes eaten away by the sea. But among those lifeless statues, this small, crusted object looked ordinary, almost accidental. For months it sat ignored on a shelf in the museum's storage room, tagged with a simple note: bronze fragments, gear's unknown origin. Then, one afternoon, a young archaeologist named Valerios Stais turned the object under a beam of sunlight. Beneath the green corrosion, he saw teeth, fine, precise, interlocking teeth. A gear, another wheel beneath it, another again. His pulse quickened. Machines of this kind were not supposed to exist in the ancient world. The Greeks carved marble. They measured stars with sighting rods. They wrote philosophy on papyrus. But no record spoke of bronze gearing, of rotation, of mechanical calculation. Stais called for his colleagues. They crowded around the fragment, arguing in disbelief. Some said it must be a modern intrusion, a piece from some shipboard clock fallen in later centuries. But the patina was ancient, its corrosion uniform with the rest of the cargo. Slowly, unease turned into fascination. If this was truly Greek, then someone more than 2,000 years earlier had built a mechanism capable of turning thought into motion. Weeks became months as technicians chipped away layers of stone and coral. Hidden beneath were concentric dials engraved with faint Greek letters, symbols of the zodiac, and what seemed to be instructions. When photographed and cleaned, faint numerals emerged marking months, eclipses, and cycles of the moon. Each fragment revealed deeper complexity, as though the sea itself were peeling back the mind of its maker. News spread quietly through scholarly circles. Some whispered that it might be a kind of calendar, others a navigational device, others something built for astrology or prophecy. None could say for certain. Yet everyone sensed that the discovery beneath Antikythera was something no museum label could explain. In a back room filled with the scent of brine and bronze, Stays leaned over the fragments lit by lamplight. He traced the gear teeth with his fingertip and murmured, almost to himself, "Who could have built this?" Outside, rain drummed against the windows of the museum. The sea had given up one secret, but it had not yet told the story. Days turned to weeks, and the bronze fragments from the Antikythera wreck began to speak, not through words, but through their strange geometry. Each fragment, no larger than a hand, carried traces of teeth, levers, and inscriptions pressed deep into the metal. The corrosion made it impossible to see the whole picture. But as the fragments were carefully cleaned and drawn by hand under lamplight, a pattern began to emerge, something deliberate, something built to think in circles. In the museum's restoration room, technicians laid the pieces across linen sheets. The air smelled of oil and salt, of tools warmed by constant use. Scholars argued in low voices, their Greek and French overlapping. Some claimed it was a navigational aid, perhaps used by ancient sailors to track their route between islands. Others believed it might be an astrological device, built to divine the will of the gods through the stars. Yet the more they turned it, the less it resembled divination. It resembled design. Under a magnifying glass, faint letters appeared on the outer ring of one fragment, Greek words marking the zodiac, the months, and what seemed to be a calendar. Around it, smaller gears rotated on axes so fine they could only have been cut by steady, practiced hands. Whoever built this had mastered tolerances so small they would not appear again until the age of clockmakers in medieval Europe. The deeper they studied, the more the mystery thickened. Each discovery seemed to reach across centuries and challenge what everyone thought the ancient world was capable of. The Greeks had built temples that defied earthquakes, sculpted marble so real it seemed to breathe. But a machine, a computer in bronze, it defied all expectations of their world. Scientists began to map each tooth, each gear, each wheel. One gear had 128 teeth, another 254. Their ratios hinted at lunar cycles, eclipse intervals, celestial mathematics. It was not a toy, nor a clock, nor a decoration. It was a calculation in metal, one that predicted the heavens. As the fragments dried under the lamps, their green surfaces glowed faintly, like fossils of thought. Some parts were too damaged to reconstruct, others fit together with unnerving precision. The museum floor filled with sketches, equations, and confusion. The artifact refused to surrender its purpose entirely, as if it was guarding its maker's genius from those who had forgotten how to listen. When the last fragment was lifted into its display case, visitors passed it by without understanding. Only a handful of scholars knew what they were looking at. They stood before the rusted bronze circles and felt something that history rarely offers, a glimpse of brilliance so advanced. It makes you question what else might have been lost. The gears were silent, but their silence roared. By the time scholars began to understand the arrangement of the gears, disbelief had already turned to quiet awe. The device was ancient, yet its function seemed to belong to another age altogether. In a world lit by oil lamps and ruled by marble and bronze, someone had built a mechanism capable of predicting the future movements of the heavens. The realization struck slowly, as if the mind resisted what the eyes could already see. Drawings were made, measurements taken, ratios recorded. When each wheel was plotted on paper, the gears formed an intricate network of motion, a web of circles within circles. One turn of a crank would have set the entire system moving, sun, moon, and planets rotating in delicate precision. Some researchers believed the mechanism could even predict eclipses, marking the moments when shadow and light would cross the Earth. Others saw the trace of the metonic cycle, a 19-year pattern aligning lunar months with solar years. The level of understanding required for such a device suggested not just craftsmanship but philosophy, the fusion of mathematics and belief. In the smoke-filled study rooms of Athens, scholars debated whether such a thing could truly be Greek. Could the same civilization that built the Parthenon have also mastered clockwork? A few whispered of lost knowledge, of workshops destroyed in wars, of libraries burned and teachers forgotten. The Antikythera Mechanism became a challenge to history itself, proof that human brilliance does not always follow a straight line. When fragments of the rear dial were examined under stronger lenses, faint inscriptions appeared describing eclipses, games, and planetary phases. The words seemed to serve as instructions, written in ancient Greek letters barely visible under corrosion. They mentioned the Saros cycle, a period of more than 18 years known to Babylonian astronomers, suggesting that this device had combined knowledge from across the ancient world. Greece had not just inherited ideas, it had engineered them. The thought unsettled everyone who studied it. If one such device had survived, there must have been others. If others existed, where were they now? Had they been destroyed, melted down, or simply forgotten as empires shifted and memory decayed? The possibility hinted at a civilization far more advanced than history had recorded, one that understood the gears of the cosmos, not through myth, but through mathematics. One evening, a visiting scholar stared at the fragments through the glass. The lamplight cast faint reflections across the corroded gears. He whispered that if this were truly built before the rise of the Roman Empire, it would mean that the ancients had glimpsed the machinery of the universe and then lost it. Outside, the wind moved through the streets of Athens, carrying with it the hum of the modern city. Inside the museum, time itself sat encased in bronze, daring anyone to prove it possible. To understand the mechanism, scholars first had to imagine the mind capable of creating it. Somewhere in the Greek world, long before the rise of Rome, a craftsman had taken raw bronze and turned it into thought. No name survived, no signature scratched into the casing, only the traces of precision and design. But hints pointed toward Rhodes, an island known in the 2nd century before Christ as a center of astronomy and mechanics. There, under the tutelage of philosophers and mathematicians, artisans built devices that mimicked the heavens, instruments so complex they were said to move with the breath of the gods. The philosopher Posidonius lived and taught there, a man who studied tides, eclipses, and the influence of the stars upon Earth. Another figure, Hipparchus of Nicaea, had calculated the precession of the equinoxes and mapped the moon's irregular orbit with astonishing accuracy. Their names floated through the debate like constellations glimpsed between clouds. Perhaps it was one of them, or one of their disciples, who designed this clockwork cosmos. Reconstructing his intent became a kind of resurrection. Engineers sketched blueprints from the surviving fragments, turning corrosion into conjecture. Each gear had to serve a purpose, each ratio a reflection of celestial truth. When modern technicians used mathematical models to simulate its movement, the results stunned them. One turn of the main handle advanced multiple dials at once, showing the positions of the sun and moon, the phase of the moon's light, and the predicted dates of eclipses. The rear panel traced the passage of the Olympic Games, aligning human time with divine order. To build such a machine required not only scientific knowledge but craftsmanship at the limits of human dexterity. The teeth of its gears, no thicker than a grain of rice, had been cut by hand using tools that should not have existed in that age. The maker had to understand both the mathematics of motion and the patience of metal. One slip of the file, one miscalculation of ratio, and the entire system would collapse. Historians began to see the mechanism not just as a device, but as a philosophy made tangible. It reflected how the Greeks saw the universe not as chaos, but as a harmony of cycles. The heavens turned like gears, each planet part of a greater design. To them, understanding the cosmos was a sacred act, proof that the divine order could be measured by mortal hand. Yet somewhere between Rhodes and Rome, that knowledge vanished. The ship that carried the mechanism sank, the workshop that built it forgotten, the genius who conceived it erased by time. All that remained was the bronze whisper of a civilization that once measured eternity. In a quiet lab centuries later, engineers would try to rebuild what that ancient mind had already mastered. But for now, the question lingered in the dust of the museum. Who taught the ancients to think in gears? When the gears were finally mapped and modelled, their purpose came into breathtaking focus. The Antikythera Mechanism was not a mere clock, it was a cosmos rendered in metal. Each wheel, pin, and dial formed a miniature version of the universe as the Greeks understood it. Turning the main crank brought time to life, shifting the heavens through an intricate choreography of ratios and rotation. The front display showed the movement of the sun and the moon through the zodiac, their positions marked against the Greek months. The smaller dials tracked phases of the moon with uncanny precision, its waxing and waning captured through a complex differential gear, an innovation thought impossible before the age of modern engineering. Behind the front panel, a spiral dial traced the Metonic cycle, a 19-year span aligning lunar months with solar years. Another spiral displayed the Saros cycle, an 18-year sequence predicting when and where eclipses would occur. The mechanism even accounted for the moon's uneven orbit, adjusting its speed through a small pin and slot system that mimicked celestial irregularities. No other surviving artifact from the ancient world showed this level of sophistication. It was as if someone had distilled the knowledge of astronomers from Babylon, Egypt, and Greece into a single instrument, then hidden it inside a box no larger than a shoebox. Turning its handle would have been like winding the heavens. The dial faces bore inscriptions naming constellations, eclipses, and cities that hosted the Panhellenic Games, including Olympia, Delphi, and Nemea. It did not merely track time, it reflected the Greek belief that human life and divine order were one continuous cycle. The same gears that predicted the moon's shadow also predicted the return of the Olympic torch. In that unity, science and faith turned together. For centuries, people had imagined that ancient machines were limited to pulleys and water clocks. Yet this artifact proved otherwise. It bridged calculation and philosophy, uniting myth with mathematics. Scholars studying the reconstruction felt both awe and discomfort. If this level of precision existed 2,000 years before the first European clock, what other knowledge had the ancient world achieved and lost? In laboratories across Europe, digital reconstructions spun into motion. Bronze gears turned once more, light glinting off teeth that had not meshed since before the birth of Christ. The machine worked. It predicted the heavens with accuracy that rivaled modern astronomy. Those who witnessed it understood that they were watching not a model of the sky, but a dialogue with time itself, a voice carried forward from an age when humanity first tried to capture the cosmos within human hands. Somewhere in the depths of the sea, fragments still lay buried, waiting to complete the sentence. Long before the Roman Empire reached its height, the Greek world had already touched a level of innovation that would not be seen again for more than 1,000 years. The Antikythera Mechanism was the product of that golden twilight, the Hellenistic age, when Alexandria's libraries overflowed with scrolls and engineers sculpted matter into movement. It was a time when philosophy, mathematics, and craftsmanship existed without boundaries, when the act of building a machine could also be an act of worship. In workshops from Rhodes to Alexandria, artisans forged devices that mimicked the cosmos. Archimedes had written of spheres that could reproduce the motions of the sun and moon, and of machines that turned water into music. His descriptions hinted at a culture obsessed with understanding the harmony of nature through mechanical design. The Antikythera Mechanism seemed to be the pinnacle of that obsession, the point where philosophy took physical form. It was the expression of a civilization that believed intellect itself was divine. But history rarely rewards brilliance with permanence. After the rise of Rome, the language of gears fell silent. The empire valued conquest over curiosity, roads over ratios. The delicate art of celestial engineering faded as patronage, shifted from scholars to soldiers. When the Library of Alexandria burned, scrolls describing mechanical wonders vanished in smoke. The names of their inventors dissolved with them. By the time the first medieval clock ticked to life in Europe, the blueprint of the Antikythera Mechanism had been lost for over a millennium. That loss still haunts scholars. It suggests that progress is not a ladder but a cycle, that humanity climbs and falls, remembering and forgetting. The Greeks once measured eclipses with hand-cut gears, and yet centuries later, sailors still navigated by rough stars and luck. Civilization had to relearn what it once already knew. Modern engineers who rebuilt the mechanism speak of it with reverence. Its gears embody more than technical mastery. They reflect a worldview that refused to separate science from spirit. The Greeks saw the universe as an ordered system, a great living clock whose rhythm could be felt in the tides, the harvests, and the heartbeat of every living thing. To build a device that mirrored that order was to honor creation itself. Yet, for all its precision, the Antikythera Mechanism was fragile, its beauty dependent on the balance of every tiny tooth and wheel. When its makers vanished, so too did the knowledge required to repair it. What remained was silence, the kind of silence that fills the gaps between civilizations, where brilliance disappears and is mistaken for myth. And somewhere beneath that silence, in the seabed near Antikythera, the lost genius of the Hellenistic world waited to be remembered. For more than 20 centuries, the Aegean kept its secret buried beneath a curtain of blue. Storm after storm swept across the cliffs of Antikythera, waves grinding coral against stone, salt sealing the wreck like a tomb. Generations of fishermen sailed above it, never knowing that beneath their hulls slept a fragment of human genius preserved in darkness. The sea had become both grave and guardian, keeping the fragile machine safe from the hands of those not yet ready to understand it. When the sponge divers first found the wreck at the dawn of the 20th century, they thought it was just another casualty of ancient trade, a Roman ship ferrying marble and bronze from the east. They could not have known that inside one of those amphora-filled hulls lay something that would rewrite the limits of history. The ocean had disguised the treasure well. Coral welded the gears together, barnacles hid inscriptions beneath crust, and rust blurred its delicate edges until it looked more like a rock than a relic. Only time and patience would reveal that it was not a fragment of fortune, but a fragment of thought. Even after it was brought to Athens, the sea continued to fight for its prize. The salt had eaten deep into the metal, fusing pieces together. Conservators worked with trembling hands, knowing that one careless motion could reduce the entire artifact to dust. Many parts were lost before preservation techniques caught up with curiosity. What survived was only a third of the original mechanism, a handful of fragments no larger than a plate, each whispering of complexity once whole. Through the decades, the mystery lingered. Scholars came and went, each one staring through the corrosion into an idea that refused to die. Some called it a calendar, others a compass, a planetarium, or an oracle of the stars. For a time, the mechanism sat quietly in a glass case, a curiosity to those who passed by on their way to see statues of gods and heroes. It took the advent of modern imaging to finally pry open what the sea had hidden. In the closing years of the 20th century, researchers aimed powerful X-ray tomography at the relic. Inside, they saw the invisible. Beneath the corroded shell lay dozens of gears, perfect and precise, their teeth still sharp after 2,000 years of sleep. Letters too small to read with the naked eye emerged like ghosts, instructions written by a hand that had long turned to dust. The sea had not destroyed the mechanism, it had preserved it, sealing a message for an age that could finally read it. And when that message was heard, the silence of centuries began to crack. When scientists finally saw inside the corroded bronze with high-resolution X-ray scans, it felt like opening a time capsule from another civilization. Beneath the crust lay an entire network of gears, still aligned in astonishing precision. Each tooth, though worn, remained measurable, its purpose definable through modern mathematics. The Antikythera Mechanism was not a myth or a coincidence of corrosion, it was deliberate engineering, a language of ratios written in metal. The discovery reignited the world's fascination. Researchers from universities across Greece and Britain joined forces to reconstruct what had once been dismissed as an odd curiosity. Step by step, gear by gear, they rebuilt the mechanism through digital models. The results shocked even the most skeptical minds. The device not only predicted lunar and solar eclipses, but also traced the exact positions of the sun, moon, and planets across the zodiac. Each motion corresponded to astronomical cycles known to ancient Greek philosophers and to Babylonian observers before them. This was not imitation, it was synthesis, the fusion of centuries of observation into one machine. When the first working replica turned beneath laboratory lights, a murmur filled the room. The front dial's pointers swept gracefully across engraved symbols, displaying the passage of time as if the heavens themselves were turning inside the box. The smaller dials on the back spun through spiral tracks that marked each year, month, and eclipse. For the first time in over 2 millennia, the Antikythera Mechanism lived again, its gears whispering the rhythm of the cosmos. But beyond its technical brilliance, something deeper stirred in those who witnessed it. The mechanism was not merely proof of ancient intelligence, it was a mirror held up to modern arrogance. For centuries, scholars had believed that humanity's technological understanding followed a steady climb from primitive to advanced. The Antikythera Mechanism shattered that illusion. It showed that knowledge can leap forward, vanish, and reappear, depending not on time but on memory. Civilization, it seemed, was not linear but cyclical, much like the gears turning inside the device. In Athens, when the reconstructed mechanism was finally displayed beside the original fragments, crowds gathered in reverent silence. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Engineers stared with envy. Historians whispered as if afraid to disturb the ghost within the machine. The object, once pulled from the sea by chance, had become a bridge between worlds, the ancient and the modern, the forgotten and the rediscovered. On its front plate, a faint inscription still reads, "Callipic Cycle," a phrase from the 4th century before Christ, referring to a precise period of celestial measurement. That single phrase, carved by an unknown hand, still glimmers under museum light like a heartbeat that refuses to fade. The mechanism had not been lost. It had only been waiting for the world to remember how to listen. The Antikythera Mechanism now rests behind glass in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, illuminated by soft light that reflects from its green, corroded surface. Tourists pass by with hushed reverence, their reflections overlapping with the relic's fractured face. It sits among statues of gods and heroes, yet somehow feels more divine than all of them. Every tooth, every wheel, is a reminder that human genius once burned brightly, then vanished beneath the waves of time. In classrooms and laboratories, engineers, astronomers, and historians study the mechanism not only as an artifact, but as a warning. It proved that brilliance is fragile. Knowledge, when not protected, dissolves faster than bronze in salt water. The civilization that once calculated the heavens by hand would later fade into centuries of silence, its inventions scattered and forgotten. The Antikythera Mechanism is both miracle and elegy, a message from an age that almost understood eternity. The Greeks who built it lived in a world without electricity, steel, or modern optics. Yet they engineered a device capable of modeling celestial motion with exquisite precision. They combined Babylonian mathematics, Egyptian calendars, and their own geometry into something greater than the sum of its parts. The mechanism was a mechanical poem about order and time, expressing the belief that the cosmos was knowable, that beauty and logic were intertwined. Its rediscovery changed how we see the past. It challenged the notion that progress moves in a straight line. It forced historians to admit that entire chapters of human innovation can be lost, not through ignorance, but through the accidents of history, wars, fires, shifting empires, the fragility of parchment and memory. Somewhere in those missing centuries, the language of gears disappeared, waiting to be reinvented long after its original masters were gone. Standing before it today, one can almost hear its rhythm. Each wheel turns another, each motion echoing the heartbeat of its maker. You can imagine a Greek craftsman at his bench, the scent of metal and oil thick in the air, aligning tiny teeth with tweezers under lamplight. He could not have known that the sea would claim his creation, that centuries later strangers would stare at it and marvel at how much was once known. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than a machine. It is a mirror showing us what humanity is capable of when curiosity outweighs fear, when knowledge is treated as sacred. Its gears no longer move, yet they continue to turn inside everyone who looks upon them, reminding us that time is both our invention and our inheritance. We did not invent wonder, we merely rediscovered it. Imagine standing before the glass case in Athens, the hum of the museum fading behind you. The Antikythera Mechanism rests in silence, a relic of both genius and loss. Its corroded gears seem motionless, yet your eyes trace their circles as though they might still begin to turn. You feel the weight of 2,000 years collapsing into a single moment, the instant when the past looks back. Somewhere, beneath the rust and green patina, lingers the pulse of the craftsman who made it. He lived in an age when the night sky was both map and mystery, when stars were the handwriting of gods. To him, the mechanism was not merely a tool, it was a translation of the divine. Each gear represented harmony, a belief that the cosmos could be measured, understood, and shared with others. In that pursuit, he captured a fragment of perfection and sealed it in bronze. The sea buried his work, but time refused to forget. When the sponge diver's hands brushed away the sand centuries later, it was not just an object he raised from the deep. It was memory itself, the proof that human brilliance survives, even when its name does not. We often measure progress by what we create next, but the Antikythera Mechanism asks us to measure it by what we remember. It reminds us that wisdom is cyclical, not linear, that every rediscovery is an echo of something once known. It speaks of civilizations that reached their zenith, then fell silent, leaving behind gears that whisper, "We were here, we understood." As you turn to leave, the mechanism catches the light. For an instant, the faint reflection of the gears flickers like movement, as if the universe inside it has stirred once more. It is not the past you are seeing, it is the possibility of what humanity can be when curiosity outweighs fear. Some inventions changed the world. This one remembered it,